What is going on, everyone? Welcome back into another edition of the Fan Committee Football Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Joe Seaman, as always, joined by my co-host, Michael Herrera. And Mike, the NFL season has wrapped up. We're about to begin the postseason here, the playoff run. Both our teams in the running for that Super Bowl championship. Both teams made the playoffs. But before we get to the postseason, we'll be talking about that maybe next week. Right now, we wanted to reflect on the regular season. So, Mike, what are we going to be doing today on the pod?
We are going to be reviewing the all-pro first and second teams we decided to come up with. We felt that the usual all-pro teams are badly made, and so we decided we wanted to try to give a more accurate representation in our opinions at the very least. And I'm excited because I think this is a chance to kind of talk about players who are deserving, especially with like a lot of times like the Pro Bowl, which is another similar kind of concept. It's very much a popularity contest, so I think it's kind of interesting to try and highlight the players who really do deserve to be considered the top of their position year to year.
Definitely, yeah. And we were talking kind of the inspiration for this. One, we just wanted to talk about the best players in the league, but also I was telling you just how stupid the All-Pro team really is because it's kind of not just one team. If you read about how they pick the All-Pro, so the Associated Press, the AP, the PFWA, the Pro Football Writers Association, and then the Sporting News, TSN. I'm not even really that familiar with that outlet, but no disrespect intended. I'm just not familiar with it. But put that aside. They kind of all vote on these All-Pro teams, and they all have their own. But then once those three things vote for the All Pro, they put them all together. So, for example, last season, Nick Chubb was first team All Pro via PFWA, and there were four first team All Pro running backs, but then Nick Chubb also made second team All Pro, and he was the only second team All Pro running back. It just doesn't make sense. When you look at like the All MLB teams, the All NBA teams, like you're never going to have like Jokic and Embiid. Some people think Jokic is the best, some people think Embiid's the best. You're not going to have first team is Embiid and Jokic, and then second team is also Embiid and Jokic. It doesn't make sense. Like I understand it shows the argument, but that's not what the point of it is. You have to
Mm.
make a decision. The voting has to happen. You have to decide who's better. It can't just be like, well, people think both people are good. So that's kind of the problem with the All Pro team is that it's really not one team. So with that context aside, the way we're going to be doing it, Mike, 11 personnel on both sides of the ball. How are we going to do this?
So I decided to my defense was with a 3-4 formation, so I'm gonna have a nose tackle, and then I'm gonna have the rushing linebackers, so the edge defenders. And then you are going to be showing us a 4-3 defense with, two D tackles, three middle linebackers, all that stuff. So
Yeah, we thought the best way to do this was, for the most part, it's going to be the same personnel, but because because we're doing 11 personnel instead of just throwing a bunch of names on the paper like the actual All-Pro team does, we wanted to have different perspectives. So two different defensive positions recognized a little more on each end here. But otherwise, without further ado, without any more rambling, we're going to get into our picks right here, and we're going to start with the most important position, quarterback. Mike,
Mhm.
who is your first team All-Pro quarterback? I think we're going to agree here.
I think we are going to agree. Hopefully, I had to put Lamar Jackson.
Yeah.
He's been insane. I think he's been underrated a little bit for most of the season. I think people are starting to talk about it now because for a lot of the season there was no clear MVP, and obviously that brings up a grander issue with the fact that the MVP is literally just a quarterback award. But
Mhm.
since there was no clear, distinct front runner, Lamar Jackson, who's really come into his own this back half of the season, has been lights out. He's been incredible, and he's definitely should be the MVP for this season. I think what he's helped this offense be able to do is insane. I remember when we discussed this at the beginning of the season before it started, was that we thought the Ravens were not going to be as good as they were because we just felt that the team was lacking that oomph, and we kind of just forgot that Lamar Jackson is the oomph, and he gets that team just up and running whenever he like really puts pedals to the metal. And I'm sure you would agree with the same way.
Yeah, I mean, we were actually a little different. I actually thought the Ravens offense was going to be really good, but I thought we were going to be seeing a Lamar Jackson MVP candidacy from like 2019 when he put up just those huge numbers.
Hmm.
But it turned out this Ravens team didn't need that. They just played this methodical pace of football all season long, and they just allowed Lamar to not only just be more poised in the pocket than he ever has, but also his legs are still his ultimate weapon. He is still such a great runner. And even though he didn't put up, 1,000 yards rushing, he didn't have to because the
Hmm.
rest of the team was so balanced and so efficient that they didn't need him to play Superman all year. But they still schemed the team around him, and that's what made him the MVP. As good as their defense is, they're not where they are as the best team maybe in the entire league without Lamar. His stats on the year, just in case you're not aware, 24 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, thrown another 5 rushing touchdowns, as well as 821 rushing yards, 3,600 plus yards as a passer. Just an incredible season for him. And two-time MVP is not a joke. Like, he is well on his way to having a Hall of Fame career as long
Mhm.
as nothing catastrophic happens. So a great season for him. Who you got as your second team quarterback?
Second team for me, we could also possibly be in agreement here, but I decided to go with Dak Prescott.
Yep, I
Um,
agree.
as much of a Dak Prescott hater I am, that's not necessarily because I don't think he's good. I just maybe that's just more because I don't like the Cowboys. But I think he's had an excellent season. I think he's really turned it out from last year. But considering his play this season, it's shown that it was literally just a bad season. I mean, it's happened to a lot of quarterbacks this year. There's a lot of quarterbacks who are supposed to be at the top of their position who just haven't been as great. So I decided to go with Dak. I thought he was incredible. He only threw 9 interceptions. He's been leading an incredibly potent Cowboys offense.
Mhm.
This really could be the year that the Cowboys actually finally get over that hump. And it kind of relates back to one of the receiver picks I have later on.
Yeah, absolutely. Dak Prescott was insane this year. I was lucky enough to have him in fantasy. Also unlucky because he had 2 points in the playoff round one and I lost. But even still, I wasn't biased. To put that aside, he is also my second team quarterback, as you mentioned. Not only 9 interceptions after I believe he led the league last year in picks.
Mhm.
106 passer rating, 4,500 passing yards, and it's so funny because this Cowboys team on paper should be worse. The run game was worse. The run defense was worse. The O line was a lot more banged up than usual, and yet Dak Prescott, along with one of his receivers, as you alluded to, were just incredible. Really helped carry this Cowboys offense. They lost Kellen Moore as a play caller, and yet they had a better season than they did last year. And Dak especially had a better season than he did last year, and I think he deserves a ton of credit. So
Yeah.
moving off of the QB position, running backs. Once again, first team running back is a pretty easy call to make.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I assume we both put Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, of
I
course.
mean, he was for a lot of the season, a lot of people were, which brought up the whole MVP discussion, is that he should be the front man for the MVP, which I completely understand. I do think in a perfect world, it probably would have gone to Christian McCaffrey. He's been insane this year. He's the NFL rushing leader, first off. He's an incredible receiving back as well when he needs to be. He had plenty of receiving yards and touchdowns this year as well. He's very much a do-it-all 3 down back, and he's probably the best at his position by far. I think Christian McCaffrey's number one, first team easily.
The second time in his career, he had 2,000 yards from scrimmage, which is super impressive.
Hmm.
More guys have done that historically than I thought. It was actually like somewhere around 15 or so, but even still, that's still great company, very limited company. And as you said, he led the league in rushing and by a wide margin. I think the second place, Derrick Henry wound up grabbing second place after his big game against Jacksonville, but McCaffrey had like 300 more yards than him, 1,459 on the year. So, like you said, the Niners, I mean, they're an incredible team this year, the one seed in the NFC, and really he was probably the best player on their very good offense. So, I definitely agree. And who's your second team running back? Because for me, this was really difficult to pick because it's just, as you said, not a great year for running backs in terms of huge statistics.
I would say so. I decided my second team running back did end up being the second leading rusher in the league, but more than that, I felt Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry was my pick. I
Okay.
felt he deserved to be second team All Pro because I think you also have to look at he is an insanely huge part of the Titans offense. They don't really have any like receiver help. They brought in DeAndre Hopkins and he just wasn't where he used to be. And that's you could blame that on the quarterback play as well. But I think it's a testament to how good Derrick Henry is that they were still able to win games because at the end of the day, a one-faceted offense will not win you more than like 1 or 2 games. And they still managed to do more than that because of how great Derrick Henry manages to be. I think what he provides as a player is incredible. And I think the All-Pro should consider who are the best, just in general and not necessarily just like one statistic. So.
Yeah. Yeah, Derrick Henry led the league in rushing attempts this season. He wound up, as I said, second in the league in rushing. It's tough. I didn't pick him, but I certainly hear your argument because he's so valuable, as you said, to that Titans offense. He kind of gave that little speech after the game, after he whooped Jacksonville for the millionth time. That was a great way. If his Titans career is over, he will be a free agent. He kind of gave a little going away speech after the game. If that's the way to end your Titans career, you do it, defeating the Jags like you always have. So, yeah, I hear your argument because at the end of the day, he still has to do so much. Then maybe if the Titans were a really good offense, he would be more efficient. But to me, at the end of the day, this was his least efficient, only 4.2 yards a carry. notably a little less rushing yards than usual. So even though it might not be all his fault, he is getting a little older in age, isn't the most consistent pass catcher. He's kind of upped his game there in recent years. For me, I was really surprised that I went here, but I think I'm gonna go Kyron Williams, even though he missed 5 games. And for the most part, when I was picking these awards, guys who missed multiple games, because the NFL there's only 17 games. So if you're missing 3, 4 games, you're not making as much of impact as guys who are healthy. But for me, in a year where the run game was so not bad, but just no one really broke out as a star besides CMC, who's always a star. To me, to be third in the league in rushing, second before Derrick Henry's big game against Jacksonville, 15 total touchdowns, NFL best 95 rush yards per game for a great Rams team. He's one of the many breakout stars on that Rams team that helped them go from what we thought was going to be a really bad team to, right in there in the playoff race against the Lions this week. To me, to have those good of stats where you're still better than 99% of your peers, even though you missed 5 games, he was the lone exception for me where it's okay that you weren't healthy the whole year because when you were there, you're still way better than everybody else.
Absolutely. And I think I toiled with like, deciding between Henry and Kieran Williams. I ended up with Henry just because for me, although it does speak to how good Kieran Williams was, he did miss a few games, and I felt that just because of how valuable Derrick Henry is, that's what my pick. But I totally understand Kieran Williams. It makes absolute sense. I get it because even with missing 5 games, he was still the third leading rusher in the NFL. Like that's crazy to have missed that many games and still be as good as he was. And I think that also speaks to the fact that like he really kind of came out of nowhere. He was probably better than Cam Akers has been in his whole Rams career until he got traded, of course.
Yeah.
So I totally understand the Kieran Williams, so it makes total sense. But what about the receivers? Who are your receivers?
Yeah, so for the first team, I had to go your guy Tyreek Hill on the Dolphins, who I probably was going to pick him for MVP until he missed 2 games, I believe.
Mm,
But he still finished with the NFL best 1,799 yards, just 1 yard shy of 1,800, 13 touchdowns, 119 receptions, and come on, he does. We were talking about Tua the other night. I mean, it seems like you're a little skeptical of Tua, so we know how much Tyreek Hill does to
mm.
elevate that Dolphins offense is just such a special receiving talent who can really just change gear anytime. And then we alluded to him earlier, but I also have CeeDee Lamb, who had a league leading 135 receptions for the Cowboys this season,
Mhm.
carrying on that number 88 tradition that Dallas loves to build at receiver. And then do you have those two as well on your first
I
team?
do, yeah.
So I'm interested to see the third guy we have here because I wound up deciding only 2 running backs. I thought 6 receivers, there weren't enough good running backs. I have Amon-Ra St. Brown as my third first team All Pro receiver. He had 119 receptions, 1,500 yards for a really good Lions offense. So what did you have on that end?
Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's on there, but he's not first team. I ended
Okay.
up going with Puka Nacua,
Okay.
which I think I know to some people might be a little bit of a crazy pick considering Amon-Ra. I think he had like 200 more receiving yards than him, something like that. Um,
Actually pretty close. Amon-Ra had 1515, Puka 1486.
oh, okay, so they were a lot farther off
Yeah.
than I remember them being, but I went with Puka Nacua because as you know we were talking about earlier, we feel like the format's kind of weird, so I didn't want to go just off of stats. I went with Puka because one, he has broken NFL history, which is a huge accomplishment. But not just that, I just think that Puka Nacua he's a big reason why the Rams have made the playoffs. I mean, he's made their offense an offense that a lot of people deemed to be possibly one of the worst. In your personal power rankings, you had the Rams ended up being the 30th best team in the league.
Yeah.
And a lot of people would have said around the same thing. They were a bottom five roster. I agree. I thought they were a bottom five roster. And Puka Nacua has been a huge reason for why they have managed to get so far. And even if maybe Amon-Ra had a little more receiving yards than him, I think what Puka did this season as a rookie out of the fifth round, and then the value he provides to that offense, he deserves to be a first team All Pro.
Yeah, I definitely hear that argument. As you mentioned, he shattered the NFL rookie receiving record for receptions and receiving yards. So yeah, the Rams. We already talked about Kieran Williams, but both of those young players really stepped up, helped Matthew Stafford put his injury issues behind him. That whole Rams offense is really just clicking right now. I definitely hear it. I think just Amon-Ra to me, he's just one of the most consistent guys you'll find. Where Puka is definitely not that he wasn't consistent; he had great stats, but I just feel like you're good to get like 8 to 10 receptions from Amon-Ra every single game. He is Jared
Mhm.
Goff's go-to guy. Where now that Cooper Kupp's back, now that Kieran Williams is back, it's hard to punish people for having good teammates. You run into this issue especially with San Fran, but I don't know. I just feel like they're more of a multifaceted offense where Amon-Ra is kind of like the key to that lines, especially in the passing game. He's such a key to that team. But I have Puka on my second team, and the other two second team receivers I have, I settled on AJ Brown and DJ Moore. Who do you got?
I have Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Mhm.
Uh, AJ Brown. I have Mike Evans, which might be a
Okay.
little bit of a controversial pick.
No, I wouldn't say so. He was right on the bubble for me.
I think Mike Evans, one, the Bucks once again managed to make the playoffs, and I think Mike Evans is a big part of that. Mike Evans is consistency. He's always been an 1,000 yard receiver year in, year out. He's never dropped below that. And I think he deserves recognition for that. I think a player of his consistency, especially with someone who's starting to get a little older, the fact that he's still able to do this like that and without a lot of recognition, to me, I feel like he should have been second team All Pro, at least in my list. And I think he deserved it. And, AJ Brown, I mean, pretty explosive. He's one of the best receivers in the league. There's not too much to explain about it. Even though the Eagles offense struggled a lot this year, AJ Brown was still pretty consistent for the most part. And I think that speaks volumes to how good he is and why I felt he deserves second team.
Yeah, you could almost say part of the Eagles' offensive issues at time were how much they were trying to force it to AJ Brown, but he still racked up a ton of numbers, 106 catches,
Mhm.
1,400 plus receiving yards. One of the best. At this point, he's kind of shifted from just being more of a downfield threat guy, but now with the Eagles, he seems just like a pure number one elite receiver. He's definitely elevated himself into that top five group relatively around the league, top five, top eight, whatever you want to say. But so yeah, I definitely had him because at the end of the day, the Eagles still made the playoffs. They still had a great most of the season, and I wouldn't put the blame on AJ Brown of all people for their collapse. There's a lot bigger issues there. I still think he deserved a spot. Mike Evans versus DJ Moore was real close for me. And I definitely hear your argument because Mike Evans has not only does he continue to be a great red zone threat, but as you said, he's never gone below 1,000 yards. He always plays enough games to get there. And I mean, he kind of saved the Buccaneers this year. I mean, Baker Mayfield, where would he be without Mike Evans right now in that offense? He's really the only. Godwin's been a little. He's not quite the same guy he was. So Mike Evans is really the key to that Buccaneers offense. For me, DJ Moore though, coming over in that huge trade with the Panthers for the number one pick, which obviously continues to go down as a horrible trade. Now that Chicago's going to have the number one pick once again this year, they get him. They bring him in. He has 96 catches, a career high, and listen, I still don't think Justin Fields is going to be elite, but I was pretty much out on him as a real starting quarterback. And DJ Moore comes in and shows that, oh, maybe he just needs weapons to succeed. And all of a sudden, Fields and him developed this great connection. And DJ Moore was super consistent this year. It's 96 catches. That means you're getting it done every single week. So I went with him over Mike Evans, but Mike Evans on a winning team, definitely an argument there.
No, absolutely. I do totally get the DJ Moore. I debated DJ Moore and Mike Evans pretty decently, but I went with just his general consistency and the fact that he's a little more unrecognized, and I felt he deserved to get his recognition. But moving on from wide receivers, let's get to tight ends.
Yeah.
Honestly, tight end first team was pretty easy for me. I don't know how it was for you, but for me personally, I went with George Kittle. Who
Okay.
did you end up
Yeah,
picking?
I went with George Kittle, and I think people, to me, when we're not talking about the MVP award, we're talking about first team All Pro, and you just have to look at the fact that yeah, he's not putting up the gaudy stats like Kelsey has in the past, or maybe some other tight ends did this year. Like Evan Ingram put up, what did he put up? Like 110 catches or something?
Mhm.
Maybe a little less than that. But George Kittle, 65 catches, 1,020 yards. We still know that he's one of the best blocking tight ends. He's just such a physical player, plays with passion on the field. And to me, he's just always been one of the leaders of that Niners offense. They would not be the team they are without him. And when Kelsey's having a tough year in that Chiefs offense, but also he kind of seems a bit slower. Like he is 33 years old, going on 34.
Mhm.
I don't know. To me, at this point, George Kittle looked like the best tight end in the league this year.
No, I agree because I think the thing is with tight end, the way the positions evolved, it's also a big reason why a lot of people are now making the argument that Travis Kelce might be the best tight end of all time just because of what he does as a receiving tight end. But I think when you look at what the tight end position is supposed to do, like every snap, they're supposed to block and receive. And I think George Kittle, he's the best overall tight end at what you want a tight end to be. He's willing to put his hand in the dirt. He's willing to get nasty. He's willing to do what has to be done to move the offense forward. And he can, catch touchdowns. He can run 80 yards if you need him to. I think he can do everything, and I think that's why he deserves first team. For me personally, I did put Travis Kelce second team just
Hmm.
because of how good of a receiving tight end he is. But
Yeah.
I totally understand why like someone else might not have put him there. Like I have a feeling you probably didn't.
Yeah. Despite how my Swiftiness continues to evolve every day, I couldn't go with him because as I said, I just think he had 93 catches this year. I'm not saying he was bad,
Hmm.
but to me, he just was not the impact game-changing player. He only had 5 touchdowns, and you can blame that on the Chiefs in general, not just Kelce. But I went with Sam Laporta. This was such a great rookie class, by the way. We already talked about Puka. Stroud, obviously, we couldn't put on all pro, but he was definitely like a top 10 quarterback in the league
Hmm.
this year. What a great rookie class.
Yeah.
Laporta, 86 catches, 889 yards, 10 touchdowns. And I guess I'm kind of contradicting myself because I was just talking about how Amon-Ra was kind of the heart of the Lions pass game. I still feel like he is because at the end of the day, I feel like he is, in big play situations, in game winning situations. That's the guy they're going to look to. But I don't know. Laporta just was really good all around. He was a great red zone target. And talking about blocking, like coming out of the draft, honestly, I didn't know much about Laporta because he wasn't putting up huge receiving stats in college. I was more familiar with the Michael Mayers and the Dalton Kincaids. And then the Lions picked this guy, and I was watching the draft, and that's what they were saying. He's a good, well-rounded tight end. He plug him in there. All of a sudden, you got Montgomery going for a bunch of rushing touchdowns. You got Gibbs having a good year. Goff's well protected, and obviously, it's not all Laporta, but if you're talking about an all-around player and a young player who's spry, I mean, he was very good on both sides of the ball. It sucks that he got hurt, but it does look like he at least avoided a major injury, but he might miss this week's playoff game.
For
Tell
me, Travis Kelce, I picked him because he was just so valuable to like the Chiefs offense because they literally didn't have any good receivers until Rashee Rice finally decided to be good like the last 4 weeks of the season.
Yeah.
The Chiefs are still one of the best teams in the league in terms of their record, although they do seem very beatable for like the first time in what's probably been like 3, 4 years. But Travis Kelce was still a big reason of why like they were still able to be as good as they are, even with all their shortcomings, which is why I picked him. But honestly, Sam Laporta, excellent pick. He's gonna be like a top three tight end, probably next year, if we're being honest. He's been great, and I think he definitely deserves recognition for that. And I totally get why you picked him.
Yeah. So hopefully next year, Tucker Kraft will be on this all pro team. But for now, Laporta was the best tight end in this year's draft class. So yeah, I agree. So moving off to the O line here, the guys who protect the money makers, the big play makers on the offense. Who do you have at offensive tackle? I'm gonna make a quick adjustment to my picks because you said you did left tackle and right tackle. I think that's the right way to do it. So I'm gonna make one adjustment, but who do you make for your picks here?
I decided I'll just say left and right tackle together. For my first team tackles, I decided with Trent Williams at left tackle and Penei Sewell at right tackle. I mean, Trent Williams, even with missing two games this year, he was a stalwart on that offensive line. He gets a little scrappy sometimes. He likes to pick fights, but he's really good. There's a reason why, even at this age, he's by far and away one of the best players on that 49ers team because he's just so consistent. He's so good at what he does. And I think the same thing applies for Penei Sewell. Penei Sewell, a lot of people said he was undersized to be playing tackle, but this kid has the technique down like perfectly. He knows exactly how to play the position correctly, and that's why he's so good. That's why the Lions offensive line was so good, to be honest, that he's a big part of it. And I think both of them deserve the recognition for being the best at their positions.
Yeah, absolutely. That's who I would have as well as my first team tackles. It's kind of unassailable because on the one hand, you got Trent Williams, who has long been an elite lineman, and really the past, I'd say, 2 or 3 seasons, he's been the unequivocal best offensive tackle in the league. No sacks allowed for him. And I know, like you said, he missed 2 games, but it doesn't matter. Like, no sacks allowed across 15 games is still really impressive, even if you didn't get
Mhm.
to 17. And, he's blocking for McCaffrey leading the league in rushing. He's helping Brock Purdy stay composed in the pocket so he can get the ball to all those great receivers. So yeah, to me, Trent Williams continues to be the best tackle in the league. And then Penei Sewell, what is he, 7th pick in the draft, I believe, in 2021. And it's
Mhm.
very weird. Like most of the time when you're picking a guy that high, you're gonna play him at left tackle. I'm not entirely sure why he's not a left tackle. I guess it's because Taylor Decker was already pretty much installed there as the left tackle. But Panay Sewell's pretty much like a franchise right tackle, which doesn't happen very often. He allowed one sack, only 7 penalties committed, and like you said, that Lions offense is another one of the best in the league. And without that type of protection, they just wouldn't be able to have that type of sustained success. So yeah, if you just look at the metrics, these guys aren't letting people get to the quarterback. They're not committing too many penalties. They're not bringing too many yards back on their teams, and they're playing games. I mean, even when Trent Williams misses 2 games, they're playing games. At age 35, I think he can miss a couple if it means he's going to play elite in all the other games.
Exactly.
So I'm okay with it. I think I agree with you for sure. I agree with you for sure. Those are my 2 picks. So who you got for the second team?
For second team, I went with Jordan Mailata and Darnell Wright for left and right tackles,
Oh, right. Interesting.
respectively. So Mailata's kind of like self-explanatory. He's just massive for a guy who used to play rugby, wasn't even playing football until what, like 3, 4 years ago when he got drafted.
Mhm.
He has become a franchise tackle for that team. Like he's essentially like he's become the next great Eagles offensive lineman after Jason Peters and Lane Johnson. He deserves to get all pro recognition. But for my right tackle, I went with a little more unorthodox pick. Darnell Wright, went with him over some of the other options because of what he's been able to do as a rookie. In recent years, we've seen a lot of rookie, like high draft pick offensive linemen really struggle because they're either on a bad team who the rest of the O line's trash, or just, I mean, it's a different game. So some of them kind of struggle, from college to professional level. And Darnell Wright, he's been able to help the Bears and like their offense. Like the Bears, I honestly thought they were going to be one of the worst teams in the league. And they were not as bad as I expected them to be. And I think Darnell Wright anchoring that offensive line has been a huge reason for that.
Yeah, the Bears, I mean, they wound up getting that run game back together at the end of the year. They wound up finishing, I believe, second in the league in rushing yards per game. But even though early in the year, remember we were talking about they're not letting Fields run. The backs they brought in the offseason are either hurt or inconsistent, but they wound up patching it together. And I didn't have Darnell Wright because I don't know, I just didn't he didn't really jump off the page to me compared to some of these other guys, but he wasn't bad. For a rookie season, he definitely had a good year. And when you have that Bears team playing so well, I literally looked at the whole Bears O line because I was like, I must be missing something here because they're such a good running team. And it's not just Fields. I mean, their other backs have had good games. There's not like
Mhm.
one bell cow, but they've all kind of had good moments. I was like, why are none of these guys' numbers like jumping off the page at me? But I definitely think Darnell Wright had a really good rookie season. My right tackle for the second team All Pro, I originally had 2 left tackles. I messed up, but I'm going to keep Deion Dawkins as my left tackle. Funnily enough, you had Jordan Mailata. I'm gonna put Lane Johnson as my right tackle. So we both got the Eagles guys. Lane Johnson, he missed 1 game, but only allowed 3 sacks, 4 penalties, pretty highly graded once again. The Eagles, even though, like, once again, they had a disappointing end of the season, that doesn't undo everything they did. They had a good run game all year. The tush
Mhm.
push, obviously, but even just DeAndre Swift had the best year of his career as well. This Eagles O line, no, we're all familiar with how good it is, and Lane Johnson's been doing this a very long time, so I had to put him there again. I think Deion Dawkins is very underrated. Uh,
Mhm.
this Bills team, their offense was still really good, even if it had ups and downs, maybe turnover related, maybe injury related. And then towards the end of the year, they really started to find, once they made that offensive coordinator change, it really felt like they started to find some more momentum offensively as both a running and passing team. It's what allowed them to kind of finish the season strong and get into the playoffs. And Deion Dawkins only allowed 1 sack, helped the Bills get to the number 7 run team in the NFL. The Bills also allowed the least amount of sacks per game. They're number 1 in sacks per game in terms of preventing sacks. So to me, he really stepped up for them. For me, it was between him and Tristan Wirfs at left tackle. But Tristan Wirfs had a few more penalties than I would have expected for someone of his stature. And it doesn't mean he's a bad player whatsoever. He's a great player. But when you're picking between 2 guys for 1 spot, I don't know. I thought that was a good tiebreaker. So yeah, Deion Dawkins and Lane Johnson for me.
How about let's get to the interior alignment? Who did you have for your guard positions?
Well, let me just say, not that these players that we're going to talk about are bad, but in terms of big names at the guard position, the league is very, very, lacking right now because honestly, like the picks I made, I probably weren't the picks I expected to make when I did the research, but I was like, wait a minute, there's not a lot of big name guards these days. So I don't know, but so for my first team, I believe so I hope I got the left and right guards right, but I had left guard, I had Kevin Dotson on the Rams, who
Hmm.
another young player who just stepped up and was quintessential for their offense. And then right guard, I had Quinn Miners, who I
Mm,
didn't realize was as good as he is, but he had
yeah.
a great season for Denver, who wound up kind of saving their season until they didn't when they benched Russell Wilson, but whatever. With that aside, I thought those two guys, very limited sacks and penalties, very high grades on sites like PFF. So I went with them. And then for my second team, I went with Sam Cosmi on the Commanders, which I'll explain. I was telling Joel Haas about that. He was very surprised to hear Commander was going to make the All-Pro team. And
Yeah.
then I'm gonna go. I was kind of torn here. I'm gonna go with Zach Martin over Chris Lindstrom, even though Chris Lindstrom had a way higher PFF grade than him. Because I didn't. This is the thing. Like, I'm not. I'm sorry. I didn't watch everyone's tape for the year. Chris Lindstrom had 7 penalties. The Falcons were middle of the road in terms of rushing yards, even though they have such great talent. And but he had a great grade, and I'm not taking anything away from him. He was really good last year as well. But Zach Martin, I mean, 4 sacks, 3 penalties. The Cowboys were still a great team. I think their O line, yeah, it's not as good as it once was, but it was still good. I think Zach Martin certainly deserves some recognition. But this is what I'm saying. Zach Martin's really the only, you know, really flashy name at the guard position we have right now.
No, totally understandable. It's kind of funny because we only ended up picking one guy that was the same across
Really?
first and second team for our guard
Guard's
position.
a weird position. Like, I don't know.
So
Yeah.
for my first team left guard, I went with Zion Johnson. And then right guard, I went with Chris Lindstrom.
Okay.
Shout out to BC, Boston College, producing two excellent offensive guards in the league right now.
Might be biased here.
I I promise I'm not biased. Zion Johnson ended up having, I think he was the third highest rated offensive guard in terms of PFF, I believe, or he was like top five. He was pretty far up there. And
Was he
I don't
really? I thought I looked at him, but I don't know. I only took a quick glance at him because the Chargers were honestly not at the forefront of my mind. But
that's the thing. I think with just like how bad or not bad, just like mediocre, just like middle of the road they've been. I think their offensive line has been pretty good, all things considered, especially with like Rashawn Slater too, also holding down like
he's
just
really
offensive tackle position. I think Zion Johnson and Chris Lindstrom deserve their flowers. I think they've been super consistent. So
Mhm.
for second team for left guard, I went Matthew Bergeron on the Falcons,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
then I went for right guard Kevin Dotson. So we did pick Kevin Dotson, both
All
of
right.
us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for them, I kind of it was just kind of similar. I just felt that they were super valuable to their teams because these are, the Falcons' offensive line was not expected to be great this year. So I think Chris Lindstrom and Matthew Bergeron, they played really well considering the circumstances. Kevin Dotson just out of nowhere. He
Yeah.
was
I didn't know who he was a year ago. I completely.
exactly, and he's just incredible now. The fact that both picked Kevin Dotson speaks volumes to how good he was this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And then real fast on Sam Cosmi, the Commanders had the worst O line in the league, just flat out. Period. I
Mhm.
think I was gonna pick. I probably wouldn't even have looked at the Commanders, but I was talking to Joel Haas, the goat, in the office, the Collegiate office today.
Yeah.
Well, I forget how it even came up, but he said something. We were probably just talking about like who's going to be the Commanders coach next year or something. And he mentioned like, well, I mean, besides Sam Cosmi, we don't have any good O linemen. I was like, okay. So then I looked up Sam Cosmi, and here he is. He's got like an 80 PFF grade. He only allowed 1 sack on that horrible Commanders O line that allowed like 5 sacks per game, or maybe even more. 4 penalties committed. He played the 12th most snaps in the entire league. Like to allow 1 sack on that horrible O line all year, I don't know. The dude must be really good. So I had to go with him. I had to go
Yeah.
with him. And in all honesty, I'm surprised that you went with Zion Johnson. That kind of came out of nowhere for me, but I would have probably gone with Zach Martin and also Joe Tunney. But those are also names that have been around a while, where Zion Johnson's a younger player. And like
Mhm.
I said, the Chargers kind of weird year for the Chargers. So I think those are good picks though. For as weird a position as guard is, I think we got that pretty good. I think so.
Yeah. And speaking of the last interior offensive lineman position, I decided for first team, and this pick might seem biased, it might seem a little homer, but I went with Connor Williams.
Even though he got hurt, all right.
And even though he got hurt, because the reason is I feel all pro the way it's already done, like we discussed, I feel like it should be a little different. So I wanted to go with a player I felt deserved it. And maybe I'm being biased. I could be. And I'm open to debating it. But Connor Williams, up until he got injured, was by far and away the best, center in the league. He had the best PFF grade just across, just like all centers the entire year up until he got injured. And I feel like he probably would have still been there, or at the very least, very high up there, top three,
Yeah.
if he hadn't gotten injured. And, I think, and maybe I'm being a homer. Maybe I should have probably put him second team now that I think about it.
Yeah.
But for my second team pick, I went with Frank Ragnow.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, he was great as well for Detroit. And the two guys you mentioned there, I think it's really important because I'll talk about Connor Williams in 1 second. I just think the fact that you look at who are some of the best, goal line backs in the league this year, Raheem Mostert and
Hmm.
David Montgomery, and those guys blocking in the interior, getting through those nose tackles, creating those holes for those running backs to get through and find that punch into that end zone. Both those guys were incredible. Frank Ragnow wound up with like an 88.1 PFF grade. That's absurd. Like very hard to get to that point. I did miss 2 games, but still a very integral part of that Lions offensive line. I had a really hard time with Miami's O line because they create so much time for Tua to find these receivers. They help the run game go from kind of an afterthought to Mostert leading the league in rushing touchdowns, Achane having great moments when he was healthy. But the thing was, Armstead had a really nice season, but missed like 5 or 6 games. I actually was considering Robert Hunt for guard until I realized he missed like 5 games. I didn't know he missed that many games. And then
Hmm.
Connor Williams went out with the season-ending knee injury and he missed about the final month of the year as well. So for me, it was hard because you had good offensive line play this year. It's just all of them were kind of banged up, so I kind of had to put all of them to the side. But I respect you picking Connor Williams because he had a great year, and I don't think Mostert gets those numbers without him. For me, I kind of went chalk on center though. I mean, what's the most dangerous? We're talking about 1 yard plays. What's the most dangerous play in the NFL? Even though they've been kind of lacking them lately, the tush push. Jason Kelsey, to me, is still the best center in the league. Still very highly graded, only 1 sack allowed, so he's not letting any of those big behemoths on at the nose tackle position get in there and disrupt Jalen Hurts too much. And then that second team, I went Creed Humphrey, because at the end of the day, the Chiefs' offense is still a little weird. And you could honestly argue maybe I should have went Frank Ragnow over Creed Humphrey, but Creed Humphrey. The one thing I will say about the Chiefs, a stat I found, they still allowed the second fewest sacks per game as a team collectively, and they still have a lot of good offensive linemen. So I don't really think their offensive struggles this year were O-line based. And I still think Creed Humphrey, he's still young, he's still on his way up as one of the very best centers in the league. So I went with him. The Chiefs offense to me is more of a skill issue at the receiver position, turnovers. I don't think you can blame guys in the trenches at all.
No, absolutely. I totally agree with you on that one. I think honestly, I think all of those picks are pretty like they all make perfect sense. I don't think there's anything like so far that I don't think any of us has made an egregious pick so far. But now
Yeah.
getting into defense.
Yeah.
I want to start with defense. So I ended up doing the 3-4. So I have two defensive ends and then a nose tackle. For me, defensive ends were very obvious for who we should pick for first team. I did Myles Garrett and Max Crosby.
Yeah.
They're two of the best at what they do. Even though they weren't leading in sacks this year, they're game changers. They do a lot. They pressure the quarterback, they make bad throws happen, they disrupt screens, they disrupt the run game. They're incredible at what they do. They set the edge as well. I mean, they do it all as defensive ends. They're what you want entirely out of them. And I think they definitely deserve their like spots as first team all pro. So for second team, I did go with Trey Hendrickson and Montez Sweat, which are a little bit of weirder picks. Trey Henderson, I feel, deserves to be on this list because he was second in the league with sacks. So I think, especially for a defensive end, he deserves recognition for that. It should be second team. As for Montez Sweat, when he came into the Bears building, he helped improve that defense. And not only he's the only player to lead two teams in sacks in one season. And that's because he was traded, to be fair. But I think that speaks volumes to just how good he is. And I think he also deserves recognition for what he's able to do, regardless of, a scenery change and playing for a less than stellar defense until he came in and helped make it better.
Yeah, we're pretty close there. I had Garrett and Crosby first team, Hendrickson second team, and then Sweat was my lone like honorable mention guy I considered. I went with Danielle Hunter instead though, because 15 and a half sacks for him, really resurgent year. Seemed like injuries
Hmm.
were kind of ending his prime, and then Brian Flores comes in, your former Dolphins coach, kind of reignites that Vikings defense as a whole. But I think Daniil Hunter was especially the big star of that. Him and Max Crosby were tied for the league lead with 21 tackles for loss and that's just absurd. I was looking at some previous tackle for loss leaders. That's pretty good. 21's pretty good. There are years, JJ Watt one year at 44, like 10
Mhm.
years ago, which is just absurd. But 21's nothing to scoff at. Not everyone can be JJ Watt. So, yeah, I would agree with you. And Myles Garrett, I saw some people saying like, "Oh, Myles Garrett, he didn't lead the league in sacks. He's only like sixth in sacks, so he can't be deep boy." He does so much more than just. It's not just about sacking the quarterback. It's about pressuring the quarterback, forcing incompletions, like all the things that you were saying. And the Browns' defense was so dangerous this year
Mhm.
from week one. What they did to the Bengals, and it just kept carrying over. I'd probably pick him for deep boy. I think he would be my defensive player of the year, defensive MVP, as I like to call it. So, what do you got at the D tackle position? I'm picking four. You're picking two because I'm doing the 4-3.
Yeah, so for my two nose tackles, I went with number one to anyone who really understands, like defensive tackle play. I went with someone who deserves more recognition, and it's Sexy Dexy, Dexter Lawrence. He is incredible at the nose tackle position. A lot of people, they said he was a terrible draft pick when they first picked him super high, but I think he deserves recognition for how good he is. He is incredible. Even, especially for nose tackles, they don't get, sacks all the time, but Dexter Lawrence, he still gets in there sometimes, and he just collapses the pocket consistently. He's really good at what he does. He's a massive body in the middle, and he's just so consistent at doing like the things he does well, which is especially collapsing the pocket, putting pressure, putting his hands up, swatting down balls. That's what he does really well, and he does it every game, like day in, day out. He's so good at it. And then so he's my first team pick. For second team, I went with a slightly unorthodox pick because some people would argue he's not a nose tackle. And it's kind of because he kind of just moves around the defensive line wherever he needs to be. But I went with Aaron Donald
Yeah,
as my
no,
nose
I
tackle.
think he's a D tackle. You can call him a D tackle. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, some people would argue he's not a nose tackle and more of a D tackle and like a 4-3. But Aaron Donald, in terms of what he does as a defensive tackle, is probably his best position, quite frankly, even though he's considered to be undersized for it. He's really good at it. And I think Aaron Donald, a lot of people talked about him a lot before this, and he wasn't really in the news as much this year, but that's because he's so consistent. It's kind of like what I was saying with Amon St. Brown. We didn't hear a lot about him this year, but it's because he was so consistently good. What's the point of mentioning every week if you know he's going to provide you with good stats game in, game out? And I think Aaron Donald is very much the epitome of that, considering he's won multiple defensive players of the year.
Yeah, no, to get bored of Aaron Donald, honestly, like this is might be a stupid comparison, but it's almost like LeBron at this point. Like it's just he's been so consistent, and people are just tired of. They'd rather talk about the fresh faces, the hot stars in the league that haven't been around so long. But Aaron
Mhm.
Donald, 8 sacks. Listen, I understand the guy once had 20 sacks in a season, but 8 sacks at D tackle is still really valuable. And like you said, he moves around, he stops the run, he rushes the quarterback. 16 tackles for loss to show his impact against the run. And listen, we were talking about that Rams offense, and that is the key to their season. But this entire Rams team exceeded
Mhm.
expectations. Their defense, a bunch of rookies besides Aaron Donald and a couple other guys. People thought it was going to suck. It didn't suck. And yeah, maybe it's because a lot of young players stepped up, but Aaron Donald's still their most valuable player on defense. Definitely agree. He's one of my first team tackles in my 4-3 system. Dexter Lawrence was tough. I wound up not picking him, but I feel wrong about that because it comes down to just like I don't watch the Giants were probably one of the teams I watched the least this year outside of the Tom
Mhm.
DeVito disaster against the Packers when they beat us on Monday Night Football. But listen, Dexter Lawrence had a 93 grade on PFF. That is nothing to scoff at. That's higher than Trent Williams. That's higher than just about anyone in the league. But I guess for me, it's just his stats are good, but I don't know. They didn't jump off the page for me, but I understand the value of having a nose tackle who can, rack up 50 tackles, stop the run. I don't know. I guess I just need to pay more attention to Dexter Lawrence, who I went with for my three other tackles here. So my other first team guy, I understand that maybe he's not the run stuffer, the physical force that some of these other guys are, but Justin Matabuki on Baltimore, 13
Mhm.
stacks from his position, but he also had 33 pressures, 54 tackles, only missed 3% of those tackles. Maybe not the run stuffer that some of these other guys are, but I don't know. If you're generating 33 pressures and 13 sacks from that position, I mean, that's like Aaron Donald light a few years ago, the way he was getting those sacks. And is he going to do this again next year? Maybe not, but that Ravens defense is very good. I think they need to be recognized, as you'll see with some of my other picks, just across the board here. And I thought he was a good pick. Now, for my second team, Quinnen Williams, to me, his stats are pretty similar to Dexter Lawrence, actually. But I don't know, maybe that was just a name value thing for me. But Quinnen Williams still had a really good year, 59 tackles, 3.5 sacks, 26 pressures. Just still one of the very best at his position. I think he deserves some credit. And then another guy like Dexter Lawrence, who doesn't get talked about a lot, Derek Brown on Carolina, former seventh overall pick in the draft, kind of brought in when Matt Rule was there, because I believe he played for Matt Rule in college. He had 96 tackles this season. And that's not just because we've talked about before, it's kind of tough to evaluate tackling because you're like, oh,
Mhm.
Carolina, they stink. They're getting run on a lot. But here's the thing about Derek Brown. Like, yes, they're getting run on a lot, but if you look at the stats, I dug deep on this because like I'm pretty sure Derek Brown's a really good player. Carolina, they were the 13th best defense against running backs yards per carry. They limited running backs to only 4.2 yards a carry. 13th's not elite, but for the worst team in the league by far to be only 13th in that metric, to me, Derek Brown is making a huge impact. Had 5 pass deflections as well. I think he's another guy, kind of like Dexter Lawrence, who deserves a lot more praise. I think those two kind of were on the bubble there for me, but I think those are the two of the best young defensive tackles in the league for sure.
No, I honestly love the Derek Brown pick. I honestly kind of overlooked him a little bit when it came to deciding this, but I'm glad you
I mean,
picked him. I think
Carolina's 2-15. I don't fault you one bit.
honestly, that's a great pick. He definitely should have been in contention there. And no, I mean, he's really been a stalwart on that defensive line. He's really anchored it, even when the rest of that defense has been very suspect at times. And, coming into, the rest of the front seven, let's get into linebackers. And so I'm going to say all of my first team linebackers just in one go because I feel like these go without question. I'm sure we picked basically all of the same players. So
Mm-hmm.
for my two outside linebackers, I picked TJ Watt, Micah Parsons.
Ooh, I no, I didn't have Micah. I had him on my second team here, actually.
Okay. Okay. Well, we still
Uh,
had
yeah,
him,
go
so
ahead.
that's
Go
okay.
ahead.
No, I mean we still both had him, so
Yeah.
he's kind of there. I do definitely get why you didn't pick him. Like I feel like I know who you might have picked for your other outside linebacker position because I think I picked him for my second team. But for my inside linebackers, I picked Fred Warner and Roquan Smith.
Yeah, I had Fred Warner because I did the 4-3. So I had Fred Warner first team, Roquan second team. I was really upset that I wound up getting the 4-3 because there's a lot of really good inside linebackers, and I kind of had to go boring because the only guys I got to pick were Fred Warner and Roquan, who are like the unequivocal best of their position, but they're also great players and they deserve that recognition. Uh, so yeah, real fast, Fred Warner, his stats are insane. Like he's just
Mhm.
an incredible, incredible linebacker against the pass and the run. 132 tackles, 4 interceptions, 11 pass deflections, 4 forced fumbles, and even he only allowed a 77.6 passer rating. A lot of these linebackers, they don't allow a lot of yards, but because they get thrown at in short yardage, they allow like high completion, high quarterback ratings. He had a
Mhm.
77.5 passer rating. He is destructive across the board. And then Roquan just gets into every gap, 158 tackles for an elite Baltimore defense. So, yeah, to me, those are the best linebackers in the middle in the league.
Absolutely. Those are easy picks. I mean, Fred Warner is by far and away the best linebacker right now. He can do it all. He can blitz, he can rush, he can cover extremely well. Like there's no doubt. Anyone who says Fred Warner is not the best linebacker in the league is clearly just a Cowboys fan. So whatever. Roquan Smith, honestly, this is gonna sound like an insult, but he's to me, he's basically Fred Warner light. He's literally just Fred Warner, just like a little worse, because he can kind of do everything the same way too. Like he can rush, he can blitz, he can cover. His coverage is not nearly as good as Fred Warner,
Yeah.
but he still can do it very serviceably when he's called upon to do it. So this totally makes sense. I get your frustration with having to put him second team because you got stuck with the 4-3.
Yeah.
I'm glad I got the 3-4 because I got to put them both first team. So for
So go
second,
ahead.
who'd you put?
Yeah, so well, we got to talk about the edge guys. My
Oh
second
yeah.
team linebackers. So I had Micah. I didn't say who my first team was. I went Josh Allen for
Okay.
first. I went Josh Allen on Jacksonville first team. My second team pass rushers, Khalil Mack and Micah Parsons. And as I said, Roquan second team for me at inside linebacker.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because for my second team, I went Josh Allen and Khalil Mack for
Yeah,
my outside linebackers. So I totally get that. I honestly thought you were going to say Khalil Mack for first team, and so
I
that's where
I
I went.
went Josh Allen because I'm not sure what made me. Maybe it was just the fact that the Jags defense is just better than the Chargers. They're pretty similar. I mean, Josh Allen 17 and a half sacks, Khalil 16. Josh Allen had 45 pressures, Khalil five forced fumbles, eight pass deflections. So they both had great years. Khalil Mack a big resurgence as a veteran. Josh Allen one of the better younger guys in the league. Uh, I don't know. I don't have like a crazy reason for why I went Josh Allen. Maybe it was just the fact that Jags were a lot more respectable than the Chargers. That's probably what informed me on that
I
one.
mean, Josh Allen, is tied for second in the league with sacks. I think that's completely an entirely valid reason. Honestly, now that you put it that way, maybe I should have put Josh Allen or Khalil or Josh Allen or Khalil Mack over Micah Parsons.
Micah's versatility is, well documented. I don't fault you for that. It's just, I don't know. For me, I mean, my dad's a Cowboys fan, and I wouldn't say he's not disappointed in Micah, but to me, Micah's weird because he's not like, at Penn State, he was pretty much an inside linebacker, honestly. He wasn't an edge guy. So in the
Mhm.
NFL, it's like he's grown so much as that type of pass rusher, but it almost makes him because it's not his original position. It's almost like he's not as explosive to me as, a Josh Allen and a Khalil Mack this season, but he's still great and like he's still getting those sacks, he's still making tackles, and he's more versatile than them, probably, a bit quicker as well, but like laterally. But I don't know. I don't know. I think Dallas defense was a little up and down for me. Maybe it left a bad taste in my mouth. He had a great year though. He's consistent. They're talking about on the broadcast. He had 13 sacks. He finally got to 14 this year. But I don't know. To me, like we're talking about outside linebackers. Maybe it's just a bias in my head, like an implicit bias. But I just can't picture him as this edge rushing dominant force the way I do T.J. Watt or Miles Garrett or Khalil Mack. I don't know. It's probably a dumb reason, but
No, I kind of agree with that because for me, like, when we've had the discussions off the pod, I have been kind of like a Micah Parsons hater. I still obviously like respect him and he's well, as a player, he's good. And so like I'm honestly kind of surprised I went with Micah, but for me, I just the versatility, I think as an outside linebacker, someone who provides the versatility to cover as an outside linebacker is kind of, crazy. You don't really see that too often. But like you were saying, it's also because he really is an inside linebacker. He was in college, and that's a big position change sometimes. So I do really see your point. And maybe if I were to go back and redo this list, maybe I'd change him to second team. So
mhm.
I see definitely where you're coming from. And then of course Josh Allen, Khalil Mack, the same reasons you did. I think a big reason he should be on all pros because he's had a huge resurgence after last year. Even me personally, when we played the Chargers week one, the Dolphins, Khalil Mack didn't do anything. Like we bottled him pretty well, and that was a big reason why we were able to win that game. Tua had time to find the receivers and make the good throws. But Khalil Mack, the rest of the season, he's been insane. And for a guy who's getting up there in age as well, I mean, it's incredible what he was able to do. And I think Khalil Mack definitely deserves to be second team All Pro. I think that's a big reason is just the resurgence he had this year is a big reason why he should be on here.
Yeah, for sure. And who do you have as your second team inside linebackers? Because this gives me a chance to talk about some guys that I didn't get to pick.
I think these I felt these made sense. I went with Demario Davis and CJ Mosley.
Okay,
I
yeah,
I don't
definitely.
know like I don't know who you put, but I just felt like these guys are super consistent. They're really good at what they do. You're always going to hear their names on the broadcast. They're always involved in the play for the most part, and they're really consistent even though they're also getting a little older. They're really good at what they do.
The Jets, that linebacker, I mean, Quincy Williams is another Quinn Williams brother. I mean, both of those guys were great this year. CJ Mosley wound up with the 10th most solo tackles and the fourth most assists. Also had seven pass deflections. So yeah, just really consistent throughout his entire career. And after, I think he got hurt that first year when he signed with the Jets. People were worried about it, but he's really bounced back since Saleh took over, and he's been really important for them. And then Demario Davis, we were talking about Fred Warner. Demario Davis allowed 58% completion when quarterbacks threw his way this year. He continues to be an excellent guy in coverage, but he also had 6.5 sacks from the middle of the defense. So yeah, just a really versatile piece. Good veteran. I saw someone made a great point. I was reading about Demario Davis. His prime was like the back end of his career. Early in his career, I mean, he's still good. He's getting tackles and all, but when he was with the Jets and Browns, it wasn't really till he got to New Orleans under, Sean Payton, Dennis Allen, that he really broke out into this great force. I wrote a lot of honorable mentions for inside linebacker. The only one I wanted to mention real fast, TJ Edwards, the Bears wound up with the best rushing defense, even after what the Packers did to them last week, which was great to see. But TJ Edwards coming over from the Eagles, a lot of people thought that he was kind of like a benefactor of the system. People thought Tremaine Edmonds was the big splash signing, and he was kind of the complimentary guy. He wound up being incredible for Chicago, and I think he was one of the captains of their defense for sure.
I agree with you. He deserves to be talked about more. But let's talk about two guys who were talked about a lot this year. One of them because he likes to run his mouth, and one of them because he was insane and broke a record. For first team cornerbacks, I went with Sauce Gardner and DaRon Bland. Who did you
Yeah,
go with?
I I I really feel like I should have put Sauce first. And this is where the statistics versus eye test thing is weird. Because there are some stats that support Sauce for first team. I mean, he was only thrown at 54 times, which is
Hmm.
so much less than a lot of these other guys. But I don't know, like I just looked at his numbers. I look at years that guys like Jalen Ramsey have had, and they're like when you're supposed to be the best corner in the league, and Sauce Gardner probably still is, but I mean, you had 57% completion and 82 passer rating, which isn't bad at all. That's good. But you look at some years, even Jair one year, I think allowed like a 44 passer rating. Jalen Ramsey was doing stuff like that. I don't know. For me, I looked at it, and DaRon Bland absolutely had to be first team because at the end of the day, the defense is there to prevent the offense from scoring. If you can stop the offense from scoring and give the ball right back to your team really consistent so that offense can score, then you're doing your job excellently. If you're creating the offense with your own defense, like the way he was doing with freaking 5 touchdowns on defense in 1 year, 5 pick sixes, to go with the fact that he had 8 interceptions. Actually, didn't he get up to 9 in
I
week
think he
18?
did,
He
yeah.
got up to 9 interceptions, 14 pass breakups. And here's the thing. Everyone wants to badmouth the Cowboys because people like making fun of the Cowboys, and that's okay. But guess what? DaRon Bland also, it's not just big plays. He allowed 58% completion against them, a 61 passer rating. He allowed 4 touchdowns on 82 targets all year. Like, that's insane success rate. He was, at least statistically, I would still rather have Sauce Gardner as like a lockdown guy, but
Hmm.
DaRon Bland was freaking incredible this year. I mean, so to me, he's the easy first team. And then I went with Travarius Ward at first team and pushed Sauce to second. Doesn't mean I think Sauce is the worst player. I mean, but Ward had 25 breakups, 5 picks, 53% completion against him, 60 passer rating allowed. At the end of the day, it's one of those things where like, am I wrong or is like a lot of other people wrong? Like, am I just not like I definitely believe in Sauce Gardner as a shutdown like elite corner, and I have him on my second team All Pro because it's like people are scared to throw at him. Like it's just the truth. But like why aren't his numbers a little more elite then? I don't know. Maybe I'm looking at this the wrong way, but I pushed him the second team because I just even his fellow second team corner that I'll mention in a sec had better statistics than him. Like, but I value the fact that everyone respects Sauce Gardner, and also I value what he did last year. I value the fact that quarterbacks are scared to throw his way, but his statistics just underwhelm me a bit. I mean, no interceptions, 82 passer rating, as I mentioned. So I don't know. Weird. I was just really surprised that he wasn't like by far the best corner in the league statistically. That's what I was saying.
No, I mean, that's totally valid. I don't think that's like an unfair criticism, so I totally get where you're coming from. For me, for my second team All Pro, I went with Derek Stingley Jr. and Jalen Johnson.
Okay.
I think those were two underrated guys. They both were very important parts to their defenses being better than a lot of people expected to be this year. I mean, Derek Stingley was really holding it down for the cornerback position. They're like the Texans secondary, it doesn't seem that strong, but Derek Stingley like really came into his own this year after he had some injuries last year, and I think he was really good. And Jalen Johnson, I think, was very similar. He he was pretty good last year, but I think this year has probably been one of his best seasons. I believe statistically it was. I
Yeah.
mean, he played really well, and I think he deserves to be respected as well. I mean, I know he was a little bit, people were talking about trading him. That was just because he was so good, and people thought that the Bears should just like tank again. So,
Yeah.
I feel like that kind of speaks to the fact that he was viewed as a valuable trade chip, and he's really good. I think he deserves to kind of just get recognition as well. I feel like all pros should try to shine the light on the guys who really are consistently overall the best. These guys seemed like they were definitely top five.
Yeah, I mean Jalen Johnson had the best year of his career by far. Pretty much every stat you look at, he's really consistent. I didn't wind up picking him, but he was very much on my bubble. Stingley was awesome in his second year, but he missed I think 6 games. And like I said earlier, like aside from Kieran Williams, I was trying to just value the fact that there's so few games in NFL season, but at the same time, I think he had 5 interceptions in the 11 or 12 games he played. He helped that Houston defense a lot. Um, I wound up I feel like cornerback is where I was the most controversial, like not putting Sauce on first team. And then my second team guy, I went with Martin Emerson, who's
Sure.
weird
Okay.
because when everyone's healthy, I guess he's kind of the third corner. Like he's not he's kind of like stuck between like well, I guess Greg Newsome's more the slot guy, but he's kind of like viewed as the third best corner on the team when Ward and Greg Newsome are playing. But listen, 47% completion against him. He had 4 interceptions and 14 breakups, and then allowed a 46.3 passer rating. People can't throw in this guy. He's those are horrible numbers. Like quarterbacks can't do anything against him this year. And we talked about Garrett earlier, but the Browns defense really well rounded this year. And I wanted to get one more guy from that defense recognition, and his stats blew me away. I didn't realize. I knew he was good. I as a rookie, he had a ton of pass breakups as well, but I didn't know he took that big of a step this year. So I went with him. But Jalen Johnson was right on the bubble for me as well. He was really good.
You know, it's kind of funny because for me, Martin Emerson ended up being like my bubble cornerback I didn't go with.
Yeah.
But I definitely agree with you. That's kind of weird people aren't talking about it, but hopefully next season people will be, or maybe even in the playoffs when there's a bigger stage and more people are going to see it. Because the Browns, he's been a big part of why that defense is so dominant and why the Browns have been so sneaky good this year.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving off that, just wrapping up here at the safety position. For my first team, it was pretty easy for me actually. I feel like these two guys were pretty easily the best two safeties in the league this year. Maybe others will disagree, but I went with Antoine Winfield Jr. on Tampa, and I was talking about that Ravens defense. I'm gonna bring him back up here. Kyle Hamilton as well in his second year, I thought was outstanding for Baltimore. He's you know what he is, and this was his draft day comp. And I was almost kind of alarmed by it. I was like, is this guy even like a real safety then? But they said he would be Jamal Williams, and he's pretty much everything Jamal Williams is supposed to be. Like
Mhm.
he's he's met those expectations that Jamal Williams really only briefly did for maybe a season or two. And granted, Kyle Hamilton's only in his second season, but in Baltimore, I feel like he's gonna sustain it a lot longer.
No, I totally agree with you. I actually picked the same players. I
Okay.
went with Antoine Winfield Jr. and Kyle Hamilton. There's not a lot to say about these guys because it's so well known how good they were this year, which is also why people are so upset that Antoine Winfield Jr. was snubbed from the Pro Bowl. Antoine Winfield Jr., who's been one of the best safeties, especially for someone so oversized that people said that that might be a problem when he got to the league, but
Yeah.
he's been lighting it up. Kyle Hamilton, someone who some people said maybe should have been a linebacker because of how huge he is, but he's an incredible safety. I mean, I agree with you. He is what Jamal Adams should have been. The same way Jamal Adams gets clowned for being basically a linebacker, being way too far down the field. Kyle Hamilton, he's able to do both. He hits like a linebacker, but he tracks and like covers like a safety does. And it's incredible to see a player with that size and speed combination.
Real fast, I want to read off Antoine Winfield's stats because they're ridiculous. 3 picks, 12 pass deflections. He forced 6 fumbles. He had 6 sacks and allowed. I mean, his passer rating was a little high, but it's also because Tampa overall, their defense isn't that great. So yeah, he had an incredible year. And Hamilton, like you said, I agree with everything. Like he's such a versatile, well-rounded player. I mean, if it weren't for Roquan Smith, probably the best player on that Baltimore defense. So.
Mhm.
Who's your second team safeties? Because I mean,
So
actually pretty easy for me too, actually.
for second team, I went with Javon Holland and Jesse Bates.
Ooh, okay. Javon.
I think I think these guys, I think Javon Holland, although unfortunately he missed, I believe it was the last 3 or 4 games of the season. I
Yeah.
know it's kind of a lot, but we have had a few guys who, even though they miss games, they're just general just greatness, kind of surpasses missing some games. I think Javon Holland really took that step this year into being an elite safety, although he wasn't talked about as much as I'd like him to be because obviously I'm a big Dolphins fan. I think statistically he backed it up that he is one of the elite safeties in this league. And I think Jesse Bates, a lot of people, at least like from what I remember seeing, when Jesse Bates left the Bengals for the Falcons, a lot of people said he's following the money. He's like, whatever. But Jesse Bates continued to prove why he got that money in the first place and why he wanted it so badly from the Bengals because he's that good. And he was one of the league leaders in interceptions. I believe he was third overall in
Yeah.
interceptions this year with
Six
seven,
interceptions. 6 interceptions on the year, yeah.
six. And I mean, he was incredible. I think those two were definitely easily second team All Pro. I think they deserve to be second team All Pro.
Yeah. Javon Holland, I did not have, and I think I was just, I don't know. I guess the injuries with Miami, like you guys had so many injured players this
So
year. It
many.
was really hard. It was really hard to give a lot of your guys credit. It's part of the reason you guys, kind of unfortunately lost to Buffalo, not to rub it in, but like at the same time, if Miami's fully healthy all year, they probably do win that division. With that
Yeah.
aside, the one difference I had Honey Badger. I had Tyrann Mathieu actually because he had a really, not that he was bad last year, but he was back to being elite this year. I mean, 4 interceptions, 75 tackles. Saints were towards the top of the league just against the pass. Really thought he reminded everyone who he is, even as he's getting into his 30s here. I mean, this is the fourth team he's been on that he's been lights out. And yeah, I think Javon Holland's right there though. Another great young player. It's just I don't know. It's frustrating. Jalen Phillips is another great young player. Missed a lot of time. I don't know. Yeah, the Dolphins were snake bit this year. There's always one team that has a ton of injuries, even though they're good. And I feel like Miami was that team this year.
Yeah, it has been really frustrating, but honestly, I like the Tyrann Matthew pick. I know people like to get on him because he's a little loud and boisterous and likes to complain sometimes. But honestly, I've been a big fan of his since his Cardinals days, and I really do like that pick. I think he deserves recognition because he has been pretty good with the Saints, all things considered this year. I think a lot of people just kind of saw that last year he wasn't that great, and so they're kind of just ready to write him off. But he's been good. He's been a solid starter for them. He's pretty great. So I definitely get that pick over Javon Holland. So I wouldn't like complain about it. I totally get it. So.
Yeah, for sure. So that pretty much wraps up our picks. Real fast, we can run through the special teams real fast, just for the fun of it. I
Yeah.
mean, first team kicker Brandon Aubrey, he didn't miss a field goal until this past week. He was at 100%. He was 9 for 9 on 50-yard field goals as a rookie who didn't even play college football. He played soccer, right?
He was
Wasn't
in the MLS, yeah.
yeah. So insane. What a find for Dallas's front office. And then I had Jake Elliott, second team because I mean, say what you want about the Eagles choking, but Jake Elliott isn't usually the reason. He's money for them.
Yeah, no, I went with Brandon Aubrey first team, and I went with Cairo Santos just because
Okay.
one, I believe when I was looking at it, he had like the third best kicking percentage.
Okay.
And so what I did was I looked at who had the best percentage and also who had the most attempts, because
Yeah.
obviously if you have less attempts, you're probably gonna have a better percentage for the most part. And Aubrey and Santos they were top two or top three. Santos was like the third in attempts, but he had the second best average. So
Yeah.
I went with him as my second team player. He also helped stabilize a Bears kicking position that was in flux for so many years since the Cody Parkey incident, which we
Right.
will
Right.
discuss. But as for punters, these were kind of just I looked at net average, total
Yeah.
yards,
Like,
average.
come on. It was
I
funny
just
though. I actually spent like 10 minutes trying to make sure I made the right pick. But like we don't need to spend 10 minutes on the pod.
no. I all I said was Ryan Stonehouse first team, Brian Anger second team.
Oh,
Just
interesting. I didn't pick Ryan Stonehouse.
really.
I forget what the statistical discrepancy was, but I decided he wasn't worthy. I went with AJ Cole, who was second
Okay.
in yardage, second on punts within the 20, really important. And he punted 71 times because the Raiders suck. So all in all, he bombed an 83-yard punt at one point. First team all punter AJ Cole for me, and I did have Brian Anger, second team.
Yeah, I mean, totally understandable. And then real quick, we'll do returners. I
Yeah,
put, your guy, first team, Keyshawn Nixon.
let's
And then
go.
I put second team, just Xavier Gibson, the rookie for the Jets. I think just the Bills game, first game of the season, should earn him a first team pro, but, got to put him second
Yeah.
over
So I
Keyshawn.
pushed Keyshawn Nixon the second team. I was weird because the thing about Marvin Mims, I picked him for first team, is that the thing about him is like he didn't return a ton of kicks or punts, but he did both. He was their kick returner and punt returner, and he did have a
Understand.
kick return for a touchdown. So I don't know. I feel like maybe he wasn't number one as a kick returner or number one as a punt returner, but if you put it all together, not a lot of guys are doing what he's doing. So I went with him as a kick returner, but that's fair either way.
No, I totally understand that pick. I think he was definitely one of the ones I considered but I decided to go with the guys who were just like better in their averages, at
Yeah,
least me personally.
yeah, yeah. And then for punt returners, certainly a duo for me. Who you got?
I went with Turpin and Mims as first and second team.
Okay, so you have Mims as a punt returner. Interesting. Did I miss the boat on Turpin? I saw a couple people said he was their pick as well. I didn't. I guess I missed his numbers because I didn't have him.
I mean, the Cowboys didn't really. I don't know. Turpin's weird because it seems like he should be better than he is, like
Yeah.
just how explosive he seems. But he was pretty consistent. He never did anything egregious, I would say, and he always got them decent field position. So that's why I kind of put him there. And
Okay.
PFF also, they had him ranked, I believe, as the best return man. So,
Okay. I went with Darius Davis as my first team. He averaged 16 yards per punt, which is really impressive at 87-yard return at one point.
Mhm.
Um, and then second team, against all odds, he was horrible last year. But Britton Covey averaged 14 yards per punt. He had 28 punt return attempts. I mean, the Eagles are back. They're back. I don't know what to say. That's how we can end. I mean, Britton Covey is an all-pro, ladies and gentlemen. We've come a long way.
Good for him. Good for him.
Yeah. So, Mike, that's a wrap for our all pro teams. I mean, the NFL should hire us. We should be the only ones voting on this award.
Agreed.
Yeah, I don't think we need the Associated Press, the PFWA anymore. I think we've got this covered.
I totally agree with you.
So, real fast before we wrap up, we're gonna be back. I think we're gonna do a little round one reaction, round two preview, stuff like that, next week. But before we go, what's your thoughts on Dolphins Chiefs this week?
I think we can beat them, but I think the
Even
team
even in the
really,
10-degree cold?
yeah.
Okay.
But the Dolphins really need to pull it together, especially with losing basically all of our edge defenders.
Yeah.
We need to play some of the most well-disciplined football you've ever seen in your life if we're going to win that game. We can. It's possible. We can beat them,
Yeah.
but we have to be disciplined. We have to know what's happening at all times, and we cannot abandon the run game at all costs unless you have to throw it.
Yeah. I mean,
Do
you
not abandon the run game.
gotta get Tyreek involved, but I think that's the key. If you're playing in the cold and the Dolphins team isn't used to that, like you have two great running backs, have a good O line for the most part right now. I know we talked about some injuries, but for the most part, those guys are healthy. It's winnable. The Chiefs are playing sloppy, and they're not that good. Like they're just not as good as they've been.
Hmm.
Think you can do it, like you said. You have to embrace the cold, shake off the uncomfortableness early, and then they could really possibly do it. Who are those guys you signed today? You signed Justin Houston, Malik Reed, and there was one other veteran pass
Preserve
rusher.
it.
Bruce Irvin. Yeah. Oh my God. I mean, Justin Houston was okay like a year or two ago, so maybe he'll help out. But yeah, without Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips and Van Ginkel, right?
Yeah, Van Ginkel as
Jesus.
well.
That's what I mean. Dolphins were snake bit this year. Maybe last year they were snake bit with Tua. This year it was like Tua was healthy, everybody else got hurt. So I
Hmm.
don't know. I hope you guys pull it off though. It would be crazy.
Yeah, no, I'm not gonna sit here and blame injuries because I think the team, for the
I think
most
you
part, has
can. I think it's fair.
I just me personally, I've always been like not I'm not I don't hate the Chargers by any means, but I don't like giving the Chargers excuses with their injuries. So I
Yeah.
don't think it's fair to do that for the
All
Dolphins
right.
because I think for the most part we have been healthy. Like most of our key players have not missed the same games. We've
Okay.
only like at most, I think like I would say personally, there was one game where we were missing three key players. But other than that, for the most part, we've had the players we've needed. And there's teams who the same thing has happened and they've been, I would say, better than us, but
Yeah, like Cleveland. Yeah, that's
I
fair.
don't know. I still believe in them, but I just need them to not abandon the run. That's all. I don't know how you feel about the Packers so far.
We can talk about the Packers on the pod next week, one way or the other. I won't waste too much time here. They're gonna beat Dallas. They own Dallas. It doesn't.
They
I
put
found it today. I saw on Instagram. Hopefully it's true. Hopefully Instagram didn't lie to me, but never lost in AT&T Stadium. And I was there in person for at least one of those wins when I went in 2019 with my family, which was awesome experience.
that's really
Aaron Jones
cool.
had 4 touchdowns. Let's have 4 more Aaron Jones touchdowns this week. We can talk about Packers next week. That's going to do it for this edition of the fan committee. I hope your Dolphins get the win this week, Mike, because I'm sick and tired of the Chiefs, even though normally I've been a big Chiefs hater, but I don't know. I'm rooting for the Dolphins this week. So that's going to do it for our all pro picks. We'll be back next week with some playoff talk, but thank you so much for listening. Make sure to follow on Spotify or subscribe on YouTube, wherever you're watching. And other than that, Have a great rest of your day. Enjoy round one of the NFL playoffs.